the doctors said the complication I had with Whitman was a fluke. It wouldn't happen again. Obviously, it did, and you all know that story. We spent several months in the hospital trying not to have him early. Then in 2015, it still obviously was on my heart, on my mind, and he wasn't on the same page. But in 2015, there was a documentary that came out. It only played 2 nights at Chesterfield. I don't think it was at any other St. Louis theaters, but it's called The Drop Box, and how he inserted a bank drop box on the side of his church apartment building, an alarm that goes off when someone drops. So it's a safe place for someone to abandon their baby. And he and the volunteers from the church take care of these children. And so Timothy said, I know you're taking me to this movie because you want me to change my mind about adoption. And I said, no, I think it's just a good movie for us to go to. So we're sitting in the theater, and it's very Christian to see this powerful testimony of this pastor, but he was very overcome with emotion. And that was March of 2015. Well, little did we know, around the world there was a little girl that would be born in August of 2015. And I just wonder what was going on at that time when we both were kind of wrestling with it. So fast forward to 2017, I was following a bunch of adoption agencies, their blogs. I had several friends that had adopted, that were fostering that type of thing. It was something that was always on my mind, and I was reading about constantly. And there was an email that popped up on my screen, and it said, what is your church going to do about Orphan Sunday? And Orphan Sunday, as you know, is always in November. And so I texted my husband, who was one of the pastors at our church, and I said, hey, what are we going to do about Orphan Sunday? And I told him that I wanted to coordinate that at our church. And so he talked to the other pastors, and they agreed that we could do that. And my prayer and all of the coordination of it, it was a pretty big deal, was that one family would come forward from our church to adopt or foster. And I was secretly hoping it would be mine. But our good friends Anna and Brody, who didn't even have adoption on their radar, just knew that Sunday morning that that's what they were supposed to do. And they were here a couple weeks ago. You guys got to meet them. They adopted their little girl, Lucy, from Columbia. But anyway, I knew that following year that he was really wrestling with it. And you may stop there. Okay.
So basically, let me tell you why I resisted. I resisted because I resisted because financially it's a remarkably difficult undertaking. It's astounding how expensive it is to adopt internationally. And so I had even said, well, I might adopt internationally if I knew that all the money was already provided for us to do it, because that's the way my mind works. If I already know I have everything in place, then okay. If I can control it, good, okay? And so, but the problem is that you can't control things. And that's the other part. I wanted to be in control, and fear gripped my heart. And fear gripped my heart because you cannot know the situation is that you're facing before you even go. You really have to go in faith. And so here I am having trouble with it because I lacked faith. And I'm doing a devotional study through Genesis about this time, and I come to the life of Abram, and I wrote these words down. I want to read these words that I wrote down. I had written, let faith and the promises of God dictate your feelings instead of letting your feelings dictate your faith. And I wrote that, and then I looked at it and said, then why will I not say yes to adoption? And so I decided I'm going to say yes to adoption. And she's been, really for the last 5 years, kind of, not nagging, that's a strong word, but we'll say nagging, me about adoption. And so I decide at that moment, I'm going to say yes. And I called a friend of mine who's a pastor who had adopted a girl from Ethiopia. And he told me that he did All God's Children. So I was going to surprise my wife. And I called All God's Children, and they sent me an application. And I filled out the application, to kind of send it, nothing involved, just I was going to fill out the application, send it to All God's Children for us to adopt a little girl from China. That was kind of the thought for a long time, a little girl from China. And so here we were, I was going to do this. I came home, I surprised her. I'm like, look, I applied to adopt a child. And she was angry. And I'm like, I thought this was going to be a husband win. And instead, it was not. And here she was like, look, I've researched this for 5 years, and you just decide on one day this particular agency and do all this, And so I was not in good graces as I thought I would be. But so she said, okay, well, All God's Children doesn't have a social worker that serves Mississippi, so we at least have to have a conversation with another agency to get that serviced, if that's in fact who we go with, is All God's Children. And so she sets up a phone call with Lifeline in Birmingham. And so we're sitting in my office, and the call comes in, and we're on speakerphone, and the first thing that the person says to me, she says, I just have to ask you, are you Dr. Gibson from Westminster Christian Academy? And I said, yeah, I taught at Westminster for 7 years. And her name was Marcy Larson. But her maiden name was Marcy Glidewell. I taught her when she was a junior in high school. So 10 years before this. So here the person who is calling us to talk to us about adoption processes is known from the time in which I was teaching in high school. And so we're just like looking at each other like, really? God's definitely in this. And then she starts talking about the countries that they service, because All God's Children didn't service India. And she mentioned India. And then we're sitting there going, we had not thought about India, but we have 2 nieces who are from India. Wouldn't it be great if the child we adopted had cousins from the same place where she was from? And so it was clear we were supposed to do Lifeline. We were supposed to adopt from India. And so we sign up this. Let me just say again, looking at the text that I read earlier, that if we're not willing in faith to help others, they suffer. And so here we're supposed to adopt from India. And once we get approved for a CARA, that's once we obviously transitioned for a new home study and all the different stuff, because we moved from Mississippi to Illinois. And again, it's just crazy, all the expense that goes into international adoption. And so here we are, we make the transition, and we get approved by CARA. And so we receive a file of a little girl who's a little under 2.5 years old. And we had to say no to that file. It was hard, but we just really knew that we needed to say no to it. And then we got another file, and it was a little girl, and she was under 18 months. And we thought, this is going to be the little girl. And it didn't take long. It really became clear that after only about a week of having the file, that we couldn't say yes to this file either. And so this is heart-wrenching. We've said no to 2 little girls' files. And it's about a week later, after we've said no to that second file, that we get this appeal from Lifeline for this particular child. And I look at the appeal. She's almost 5, and once you get to be 5, you get adopted because you age out, essentially, of people's minds. And so they're sending this appeal for this child, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, we need to look at this file. And so I'm going to let her talk.
So I was still grieving the last file. And with both of the files that we had before, I contacted numerous doctors and specialists, and I felt like I was fighting for this child more than anyone ever had. But I was just burned out by the process too. We started in October of 2018, And at this point, it was the end of May of 2020. And India was shut down because of the pandemic, and not shut down like Americans, sitting in their recliner watching Netflix. It wasn't like that. Like, they were legit shut down. People couldn't work. Everything was closed. Courts were closed. Offices were closed, government offices. It was very depressing, just thinking, are we ever going to get this process going again? So I just did not have the emotional energy to even look at this file. And he said, I really think we should. And so, obviously, you know who it was, but she was adorable. But all the research I had done about attachment and how crucial those first 2 years are, I was just really scared that she wouldn't attach to me and to our family. And I've met several friends throughout this process that live really all over the world, but have all adopted from India. And one girl who's just become a dear, dear friend had received a file of a little boy 2 months prior, and they were only qualified, according to their home state, for a girl. And she called me that week that we were trying to make our decision, and she said, I have to ask you a question. If she were 2 and everything else was the same, would you have already said yes? And I knew what she was saying, because that's how she made her decision, knew that she was supposed to make the right decision, was because if the little boy had been a girl, she would have said yes right away. But anyway, so. And
I just want to say real quick that in the adoption process, I had peace, and in a sense of not being afraid for a very short window. I was scared pretty much the entire time, still scared, to be honest, but I was really, really scared the entire time. But there was about a week, maybe actually about a little bit longer, I was not scared. I saw this file and I told Brooke, this is our little girl. This is who we're supposed to adopt. And so as soon as Brooke would eventually say yes, obviously, as you know, then I started getting scared all over again. But anyway, I just want to say.
So anyway, Sunday, June 7th, last year, Timothy said, we need to make a decision, on Monday. We had been praying, and I was just like, God, please give me peace. Just show me what we should do. I'm so scared. I don't know if this is the right decision. And you probably remember all of the unrest in our nation last summer. And there was a book that I had read a couple years prior by Bob Goff. He's a Christian author, and it's called Everybody Always. It's very good. I highly recommend it. And that morning, I was like, I need to pull that off my bookshelf because I want to start reading it again. And I just before I got in the shower, just kind of flipped through it, and I landed on this page. And he says, people who are becoming love experience the same uncertainties we all do. They just stop letting fear call the shots. And it was just like, okay, Brooke, you know what you're supposed to do. And so an hour later, I was at church with the boys, and a friend walked up to me right before the service started. We were outside at that time. And she handed me an envelope and said, this is for you guys. I stuffed it in my purse. The service started. The boys and I were driving home afterwards, and we were at a red light, and I remembered the envelope, and I pulled it out, and there was $500 cash in it. I started crying because it was just like God was saying, I'm in this, I'm providing, you need to say yes. The light turned green, and the song that came on, Joy FM, is one that you probably all know, is Who You Say I Am by Hillsong. And I just felt like God was saying, are you going to trust me to keep carrying you through this process? The song lyrics say, in my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. in that moment, he gave me peace that he had a place for this little Bengali princess, and it was with us.
Thank you, John and Lisa. I just want to say one other piece about that too is that when she's like a journalist, an investigative journalist when she gets her mind on something, and she was doing research, trying to figure out, learning more and more about this particular child's file that we're reviewing, and in the process of that, she found a lady who had adopted a little girl from the same place where our daughter was, the same orphanage. And when she went over to get her daughter, and this was, well before, this is when, Valen was 2.5 or so, and she's over there, and when she got there with her husband, they had shut, the judges had went on strike, so she couldn't take her child, but she was not leaving without her child. And so she ended up staying, how long was it? 3 months. She stayed in India for 3 months. Now, if you see the place they live, you realize that 3 months is no issue for them. They have a castle that they live in. But anyway, she was there 3 months, and she would go from 11 to 5 every day to the orphanage. And when she finally, and so we have pictures of her with our daughter, because our daughter was best friends essentially with the little girl she was adopting, and she would have both of them in her arms. And when she was leaving with her daughter, Valen said to her, "I want a mommy too." Now, I've got to tell you, I looked at Brooke when Brooke was finding this out, and I said, "She's already attached to you." And I'm going to go and tell you, from the very moment we got her from the orphanage back to the place where we were staying, and Brooke gave her a bath, from that moment, she's been attached to Brooke, always. And it's a beautiful, beautiful sight. Really, what you can see a little bit in this, though, I hope maybe you can, is that my faith was not that strong. Her faith in a certain moment in the adoption process was not really that strong. But the point of what Jesus is saying in this text, it doesn't matter how strong our faith is. It matters that our faith is present. Because if we have faith as a mustard seed, just a little, just an ounce, because our faith is not always that strong. But God is always that strong. And he can move mountains. She was talking about Anna and Brody. Their little girl just had surgery here at Children's because she's got, it was CP, right? And for her to be able to walk, they had to perform the surgery for her to have a chance to walk. And so I'm in the midst of reading through Matthew 17, and I text them this. This is what I text them. Prayer is faith that breathes. And I want to stop because Mark says that they lacked prayer. Matthew says that they lacked faith. Okay? It's not a contradiction because prayer is faith that breathes. They are the same. It is a reminder that we must always look outside ourselves and our human competency for God's deliverance, strength, and sustaining power. How do we move mountains? We have a faith that breathes, and so we talk to God with trusting hearts. And then I said, I am praying for your precious daughter and for you both and for Lucy's amazing sisters and for the doctors and nurses. May a mountain move and may Lucy walk. Anna immediately replied, "See, there is a little bit of Pentecostal in you after all." And so I texted back. Probably I said, I am married to Brooke after all. But faith that breathes always focuses on and trusts the outcome to God, even when our faith is small, and God honors that focus. Here's the problem the Pentecostal puts deliverance in human hands by the expression, if only they had enough faith. And that's not right. If only our faith is in the right person. And so, moving mountains does not come by the measure of our faith, but through the mere presence of it. And if Jesus' words show us that in spite of times when our faith is stretched and small, we count not on the power of our faith, but the power of our God. Psalm 62:11 reads, "One thing God has spoken, two things I have heard. Power belongs to you, O God." And so I want to read this comment by Frederick Dale Bruner on Matthew 17, verse 20. Realism usually counsels us not to make claims as sweeping as moving mountains, even for Jesus. But there can be no question that the goal of this story is to inspire faith within us, that if we believe in God with even a small quantity of faith, a faith that at least says its prayers, we can level every mountain in our lives. Is this unrealistic? Has Jesus been risen? That draws my heart to a Christian song that I really have just registered with lately. It's just been on my, every time I hear it, it just ministers to my spirit. It's called Rattle. Saturday was silent. Surely it was through. But since when has impossible ever stopped you? Friday's disappointment is Sunday's empty tomb. Since when has impossible ever stopped you? This is the sound of dry bones rattling. This is the praise make a dead man walk again. Open the grave, I'm coming out, I'm going to live. I'm going to live again. The church finds her authoritative power in the majesty and the glory of Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration, but she finds her help in our prayers of faith in the valley. And I will tell you, I'm going to turn this over to Brooke again, I will tell you that in spite of my sparse faith at times, she always said, God's going to move a mountain.
So the process was very difficult. India is, and their processes are very inefficient. You can't count on a timeline. You can't count on a judge to be informed about what adoption is or how the process should go. Like we said, during the pandemic, everything was shut down. But one of the difficulties during the process came towards the end, and most of you know that our visas got lost in the mail. And it was Christmas time, and I thought Timothy was going to have a coronary every time he was on the phone with USPS. But basically, it got shipped to a distribution center north of Chicago, and they didn't know where it was. It could be lost, and we would never get them, which to get emergency visas to fly to India when it's shut down is not an easy process. It would have been months to get new ones. They said that it could be 3 weeks before they could find it. And so my boss could tell I was visibly upset that morning. And he said, I think you need to call our Illinois senators. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah, and he had a connection with one of them through his sister. So I had a connection with one of them. I called, but the other, I called some representatives too, another senator. I just cold called and told them our story. And two of them in particular just went to bat for us. And one of the staffers said, I will not let down my guard until they have those visas to you. Like, you were flying over there to get your daughter. And I don't know if he has a relationship with Christ, but I was able to share with him our heart for adoption and how we knew God had called us to this. And so the morning that we found out they could be lost, and it was just really discouraging, God led me to Matthew 9, and I just knew that I needed to sit there a minute. Specifically, Matthew 9:22, Jesus turned and saw her. "Have courage, daughter," he said. "Your faith has saved you." And the woman was made well from that moment. And if you aren't familiar, the chapter includes really poignant examples of people who believed fiercely in Jesus' power. And this verse, of course, talks about the woman who bled continually for 12 years. And I shared with my mom's group that week, after just spending time in Matthew 9, I think so often we would be like, if I can just spend a day with Jesus, or if I could just hug Jesus, or, hold his hand. And this woman was like, if I could just touch his hem, if I could that would just be enough power to heal me. I mean, she believed so deeply in her soul that he was that powerful. And it just really made me pray different after reading that chapter and really meditating on it. Like, do I really believe that God can find an overnight envelope this big that should have been sent overnight but has been sitting there for 11 days? Can he find it in all the Christmas mail that's lost? Probably most of you lost a package or a Christmas card